Baroda, Motwani Jadeda Foundation, Rajasthan Tourism, JCB Prize for Literature Festival Bookstore managed by Full Circle, Aga Khan Foundation, Racket Benkissa, Diageo, AirAsia, Kingfisher, Red FM, Launchora, Facebook, BeLive, UFO Movies, Save the Children, Pratam Books, North India Office, US Embassy, New Delhi, Mahindra World City, British Council, Netflix, Etsy, Public Health Engineering Department, United Nations India, Avid Learning, Murty Classical Library of India, Harvard University Press, Australian High Commission, Paris Buildtech, Sahitya Academy, Centre for Policy Research, Danik Bhaskar, Rajasthan Patrika, Amar Ujala, Business Standard, INOX, Mathrubhumi, Outlook Magazine, The New Indian Express, The Tribune, Jan Mikalski, Zomato, DLF, Penguin Random House, J. Sri Periwell International School, Citibank, Storytel, CK Birla Hospital, LIC, Sotheby's, SBI, John L. Bissell Foundation, JW Marriott, Airtel, Karma Kettle, Grover Zampa, Coca-Cola, Gulmohar Lane, Taj Rambagh Palace, Clark's Mayor, Royal Opera House, Mumbai, The Lalit, Full Circle, Yuva Ekta Foundation, Royal Treasure, Eventbot, Edelman, Social Connect, McCain, Unibic, Wagbakri Tea, Maskin, Canhouse Suites. I would also like to thank Diggy Palace for hosting us year after year and providing such a beautiful venue. And most importantly to me, in this venue, all of my volunteers. I will be thanking them throughout the day, but I want to start by thanking all of my volunteers here today who make this happen and make sure you have a wonderful time in our venue. So, now starting while you're here, which is our first session of the day, Intersections, Caste, Colour and Gender. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Ruchira Gupta, Yashica Dutt, Sharmila Sen, Urvashi Butalia and Vivek Tuteja. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Great. My name is Ruchira Gupta, and I'm the moderator of this panel. I have followed the work of my panelists and know some of them and seen their absolute commitment to toppling hierarchies in the quest for equality. So I'm really pleased to be moderating this panel with them on intersections, caste, color, and gender. Before I start the moderation, I just want to voice a protest about something, an incident which took place in the Jaipur Literature Festival yesterday. There was a bunch of young people who had come to hear a panelist called Ravish Kumar yesterday, and after listening to him in the area where young people can mingle and talk to each other, they had formed a circle and they were singing songs of protest. And they were actually heckled out by JLF volunteers who also involved the police. And this is not in the spirit of the festival. This festival is about debate and dialogue, and this should not have happened. So I do want to voice my protest before I start the panel. I will start by introducing myself too. I'm an activist and a journalist who began her journey in the hills of Nepal, where I found rows of villages with missing girls, followed the trail, found them in the brothels of Bombay, and ended up making a documentary on the subject, won an Emmy, quit journalism, started an NGO. And 25 years later, I find that I'm still battling children in cages. There are detention camps in the United States, there are detention camps in India, and potentially children are going to be put into both. In America, we already know that children are being put into detention camps. So the four people that I have on the panel with me have been battling cages all their lives in different ways, and I think it's a call to action, our panel, saying no more cages. I'll start with Yashica, who is an activist, a writer, and she has come out with a book called Coming Out as a Dalit, and she will talk about her journey, why did she need to come out, and how is that relevant to intersectionality.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Ruchira. And we were talking about this a little bit earlier about why did I feel the need to come out, and why did I even use the words come out? Because usually it's associated with coming out of the closet of your gender, coming out of the closet of your sexuality. How do these definitions extend to what it means to have the closet of being in your caste? So, and apologies if you were in the last session and I spoke about this there as well. But I grew up hiding my identity as a lower caste person. And not just a lower caste person, but from the lowest of the lower caste family. And there was a lot of shame that was associated with my caste. But the exact name of my caste is the Bhangi caste, manual scavenging. And till maybe not even 2 generations ago, people in my family went out and did the work. Thanks to affirmative action, reservation, we were able to get government jobs and look upwardly mobile even though we weren't. And when I grew up hiding who I was, there was a lot of trauma with how I thought I had a place in this world or I didn't. I thought I was never going to be worthy or good enough. And that's not because I had a self-confidence issue, because that's also how this is framed as that, oh, why can't you just be more confident? Why can't you just have a wellspring of confidence coming out of you? The reason I felt that I couldn't do that is because there was so much shame associated with being a Bhangi. It's a slur. If even within our own communities, if we say, oh, don't act like a Bhangi. What does that mean? That means you're uncouth, that means you're unclean, that means you don't deserve respect, and you're not valid. So I had to challenge this idea of, in fact, I didn't even challenge it until much later. I grew up with this idea that I am not equal to everyone else. And because I am not equal to a Brahmin, for example, or any other upper caste person, I had to keep making up for that lack. There was always a gap between who I was and who I wanted to be. So I grew up with this constant struggle, and I've written about this in the book. I could never enjoy anything that I did, and I worked really hard. I worked really hard in school, I worked really hard in college, and I'm saying that not because I want to brag. I do, but also not because of that. It's because, even for African Americans, I think it's been said that there's a phrase or there's a saying in the community, in the black community in the United States in particular, you have to work twice as hard to be half as good as a white person. And I think it's very similar for Dalit people, and especially somebody from my particular community. You do have to work twice as hard, and you never feel you're good enough. And I grew up with that, and I became a journalist, and I became a fashion journalist. It's not that I was not interested in politics or I didn't want to write about political issues. I had strong opinions about reservation, but I thought fashion would be a safe space. The reason it would be a safe space if any of us cover fashion or familiar, it's a caste-blind industry. And what I mean by that is, if you work in fashion, are associated with fashion, you are inherently elite. And if you're elite, because the definitions are so coded, if you're elite, that means you're upper caste. If you dress a certain way, that means you're upper caste. And I thought I could hide there safely. And I did for a long time, until I realized that I wanted to do more with my life than cover fashion, which is a valid choice, but I wanted to explore more avenues, and I went for a graduate degree in Columbia. And that's where I realized these conversations about oppression and discrimination and systems that are built for a certain majority, whether it's men, whether it's white people, whether it's upper caste people here. And that really challenged my idea of, why did I think I wasn't an equal person? Why did I think I wasn't equal to everyone else? And that's when I started questioning and challenging these ideas that I had formed about who I was. Because till then, being unequal was my reality. It was a granted truth, a fact of my life. And after going to the United States, I was able to get some distance from this constant probing, from this constant question of, what is your caste? I could maybe for a couple of months forget what my caste was. And when I forgot is when I could really find the space to be myself. And of course, I've talked about this before, my glass was fully full in terms of questioning and challenging my identity is when I read Rohit Vemula's last letter. For those of us who don't know, Rohit Vemula was this wonderful, bright scholar, activist, who was forced to kill himself because he faced institutional casteism and discrimination from the Hyderabad University. But he also left this wonderful, beautiful last note that for a lot of Dalit Bahujans was a moment of awakening. And when I read that and he talked about how man was a mind and he was made of stardust, and how we were not just a vote, we were not just a number, we were so much more, and that ripped the Band-Aid off me. And I decided that I was going to reveal my identity to the world, but also create a space for people like me to not talk about just reservation or whether we deserve to be here or whether we have merit, but to just share our traumas. And I launched a Tumblr. It was called Documents of Dalit Discrimination. And I realized that I couldn't possibly ask other Dalits to tell me their story unless I was telling my story first. And I realized that I needed to, this was a significant moment in my life, and I needed to mark it down. And in terms of how identities are challenged and how we acquire other identities that are not ours, I realized coming out of the closet would be the best metaphor. And of course, it's queering the term, as we call it, but I think it fit very well. And I decided to write a note that was titled Coming Out as Dalit.
Thank you. Thank you for your bravery and courage and explaining how even coming out can be a step towards toppling a hierarchy. Vivek, you have toppled the hierarchy or tried to by coming out as gay, which is again another minority group, and manifesting your sexuality. What was that like, and what happened when you came out?
So let me just start off by saying that, you know, just by the very virtue of being a man, it's such a privilege, right? And then by being a gay man, sort of in the pecking order of LGBTQIA, that again is on, I would think it is on the highest. And that not for a very, I mean, earlier you don't think about these things as you're growing up and, you know, as you want to face the world. But then when you start reading more and learning and understanding and watching and knowing other perspectives, you come to take a sense check of the privilege that you have. Of course, the struggle was there, but, you know, I came out at 18, and I came out in a fit of anger. I think I was just very angry, and there was just hate. There was no empathy, there was no understanding, and because of just being shunned at home, by a certain, I used to love trying out women's clothes at home when I was younger. I loved dancing in that manner and fashion, and it was, the patriarchy was so deep instilled and rooted in the house, in a Sindhi joint family, that you just cannot be who you want to be, and you cannot express. It's just a certain role that is expected out of you, and you fit in, and if you don't fit in, then you are the other, which I think to a very large extent all of us are. And then to try and break that. So I didn't, at 18, I didn't know any better. I don't know if I know any better today, but definitely a little more. But at 18, I didn't think about patriarchy. I was just angry. And I don't know where that rage came from. The fact that I was trying so hard to fit in that I just wanted to be straight. The fact that I couldn't tell another boy in my college that I liked him. The fact that I felt I was the only gay man in my college and school as I was growing up, and there was nobody to confide in. The fact that I confided in a cousin, and and she was the one who turned around and told me that, you know, I wasn't fit for the family and that I didn't belong. The fact that my parents didn't understand. So I don't know, there are so many facts, and there are so many insecurities that you grow up with. And I think all you need is empathy. And today when I look at non-binary, and I look at the terms, and I look at people claiming their identities and reclaiming it, it gives me such joy that, you know, today we are in a position to do that. which about 20 years ago we weren't. Like people couldn't even care less. They would just throw slurs at you. But today you have safe communities, you have conversations. But again, are those surpassing the privileged? Are they going universally? Are they being, covered by everyone? Does everyone get the right to do that? Or is it only the privileged? Is it just in an echo chamber of Twitter and Instagram and Facebook? Because it's so nice and lovely to talk about it on Twitter, right? To tell my story, and people will send me hugs emoticon and kisses emoticon, and they love me. But is that the reality on the ground? I don't know. Because we need to understand that reality. And we are very privileged to be able to do that. Sometimes we get so lost in living our lives that we don't go out on the streets to listen to people. And I think listening and empathizing and reading and watching and learning and knowing people's stories is something that I think we lack. And I know I lack it. And I'm trying to be better at it by trying to do it every day. And those diverse voices are so needed today. I'm sorry, I'm trembling as I say this, but it's so, so important. Because that's what will open your mind and hearts, right? Like, yeah, you can say that, oh, I have a gay friend. But why can't your friend just be a friend? Why do you have to attach that adage of being gay? Why does that matter at all? Because I remember when 377 got repealed, and I got all these congratulatory messages, and people were crying with me and loving me. And I was like, yes, that's great, but what next? Because my cousin, she has a 18-year-old son, and I asked her, so what if your son comes out? And she gave me a very disgusting look. And this is post 377, post a message from her saying, hey, great news, good for you and the community and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, but you don't want to live it. You don't even want to see it. So I think to a very large extent, the privilege for a very long time sheltered me. And once I stepped out in the world and met people and understood, I think that's when I truly, truly came out. Yeah, all right.
Another brave, path-breaking testimony. And my next question, and you can think about it because I'm going to ask Sharmila the next question, is that toppling one hierarchy or coming out, how did it help you connect with other struggles which are going on in our country? So think about it, and I'll come back to you later. Sharmila, you live in the United States, and you're the editor of the Harvard yes, and you have written a book about color and taking on the hierarchy of race, and which is based so much on skin color. What made you take that on? Because in America, you would not be defined as black, and I have met a lot of Indians who would love to distance themselves from the idea of blackness by saying we are not them. So what attracted you to writing this book, and how does it connect with the other work you do now?
So first of all, good morning to all of you, and thank you for coming out early morning for this, early-ish. Okay. So I wrote a book called Not Quite, Not White, and it's a memoir. My publisher in the US also calls it a manifesto because if you've read it or if you take a look at it, you'll see it's not a feel-good memoir, it's not a triumphal narrative. I'm not a person who can give you a happy ending, nor is it the kind of classic American immigrant's tale, which kind of ends somewhere, usually in New York, saying, and now I've finally found out what I am. I'm in this great melting pot of New York, or some, fill in the blanks with some other kind of cosmopolitan American city. I was born in India. I lived in India till I was 12. I've lived in the United States for the past 37 years. And in these 37 years, I think I've come to study it. I have an anthropologist's eye and heart, and I think I understand the country a little bit. And I don't say it just to be self-deprecating, but to be actually realistic, and also to, be a little bit cautious about the way in which, I mean, right now being in JLF, being in India, and, living in the US, I often see how many people come to India and they'll come for 5 days to JLF or spend 2 weeks in Delhi and Bombay, talk to 3 or 4 of the same kinds of people, move in the same circles, and they'll be Insta experts, right? So it's just some sort of a 21st century version of the old India hand. So I always sort of, not jokingly refer to myself as an old America hand. I can look like the natives, I can speak like the natives, I've even dated a few natives and, shared bed and board with them. Just like, Englishmen once did in the 18th century when they came to this country. But 37 years is a long time, you might say, that I might be an incredibly slow or obtuse person not to understand certain basic categories of thought. But that's because I was born in a country where we have many, as this conversation is already showing, many ways of dividing ourselves up, creating boxes, creating hierarchies, policing those lines. We're very good at difference, I think. But this particular American vocabulary of race, which is distinct from other European versions of it. So American race is not the same as the way race works in the UK, for instance, entirely different histories. But that was something that was thrust upon me at the age of 12 when I landed in the US. And it took me 37 years to really, get to make at least some small steps towards understanding it. Because in India, if you know, the first census in the 1950s does not include race as a category. So we made a decision as a nation to not use race as a category. Having been born in independent India, therefore, it makes sense that I didn't grow up with that. Of course, our parents, our grandparents had a notion. It's not to say we don't have a notion of race in some vague way, or color, of course, which is not quite coterminous with race. It overlaps, but it's not the same thing, race and color. But I would like to have you think about, that older way we had of thinking about race was more based on politics. It was based on nationalist politics. But in the US, race is something else. So I wrote this memoir. I wrote about myself because it's just the easiest way to tell a very ugly story without having a bunch of people being pissed off at you, right? So I can just be this is not, I am not the heroine of my own story. I'm the villain. I wish I could be the vamp. That would be kind of cool because I like old Bollywood movies, but I think I'm just a plain old villain in mine. So I decided to, when I'm an overachiever, I'm very enthusiastic about whatever I take on. So when I came to the US at 12, I decided in 3 months I was going to wear my hair the way, all the cool kids were doing back in 1982. I would speak the way you hear me speak now. I would know which Duran I liked and Duran, all the things that you have to do to fit in early 80s America. I was Americanizing. I was assimilating, which is an age-old story of the United States. But what does it mean? Assimilate into what? What America was I actually trying to throw myself into or blend into? That took me 37 years to understand, because what it was I was trying to assimilate into white America. And we could, maybe in Q&A we can talk a very specific kind of white America. There is more than one, but let's just say an aspirational, upper middle class white America. But it took me that long to name it because whiteness is not named in the United States, right? So much of this book, I don't say, I won't, get upset if someone calls me brown or whatever, but I actually very specifically in this book, I'm playing with this rhetoric of naming whiteness. So I say I am not white. What I am, we can fill in the blanks, but part of that is I think there is great power in naming that which is not named, because that which is not named is the normative, and the normative, the thing that's normalized, is made invisible. So we don't name men, for instance. That's the reason you don't say, that's a man doctor, but we say that's a lady doctor. We don't name upper casteness or upper castes because it's weird, right? If I say, there's a Brahmin author, or that's a Brahmin, whatever artist. But we take great care, even progressives, of naming that which is minoritized, that which is seen as. So there's something about, what I think of as the armature of adjectives, that some people have to bear more adjectives. And this is, by the way, true both for people on the right and left of the political spectrum, right? That, some kind of, I think there's also some ugly things about commodifying the minoritized identity, right? That's what you said, Vivek, right? Oh, I have a gay friend. That's so, and like what kind of like progressive message is that? That actually says, look at my politics, I'm so open-minded, right? Where your gayness is kind of turned into something that kind of makes me look cool. But anyway, so I just, naming whiteness in America is a dangerous thing because you become a bad person. Suddenly you're that person. You're a little angry. You're like talking about race. I used to be a professor of English at Harvard. I could talk about brown people, yellow people, all sorts of people, literature. But if I ever named whiteness in class, when I talked about white literature, if I named a character and I said, let's look at this white character, there was this electricity that ran through the classroom. And people were like, ooh, she's kind of into this race thing, Because that's what I think. I think when people who are not white name whiteness, at least in the United States, ordinary talk becomes race talk. And I wanted to understand what that meant and why is it that, there's such discomfort? Why does it feel like an atom bomb is dropped into a room when I say the word white? So that's a lot of that is what this book is about.
Thank you. And of course, I'd like Urvashi to tie all the threads together. You have been a feminist for decades, documenting the history of feminist struggles through your publishing house, Kali, and then Zuban. And, intersectionality is something which all feminists are trying to explore now because we believe that the discrimination between male and female and men and women is foundational for us to absorb all other hierarchies because it's at home that we first realize that it's all right for one group of human beings to order and one to obey. And gender digs a trench into our brain into which all other hierarchies fall when we step out of the house. So then we accept caste as normal or hierarchy along sexuality as normal or race, skin color as normal. And everything seems more and more normal till we begin to imagine that what we experienced at home is the comfort zone we want in society and in life. So if we have a bully as the head of the family and his decisions are right or wrong, we want a bully as the head of the state, who we will vote for whether he's right or wrong. And so Urvashi, intersectionality, of course, is what feminists are trying to now tie our struggles to. So I would like you to speak about that and how can we do this going forward now at this time of toxic masculinity?
Yeah, okay, thanks, Ruchira. Yeah, I'll talk about that. I just want to say, when you opened with this little protest about the shutting down of the protest, you named the volunteers. And I just want to say, I'm pretty sure their hearts were with the protesters, but they were doing what they had perhaps been tasked to do, because they've been so fantastic that I think I was a little concerned at that, because they're young people doing really good stuff here. So
I was told this morning that they did it on their own, 2 volunteers.
Yeah? Okay, all right. Okay, then I'm wrong. Okay, so this idea of intersectionality, which we are discussing here, in some ways what happens is that someone coins a description or gives word or articulates in excellent words a concept or something that has always been around, and suddenly you think, my God, that's what describes what we've been doing all this time. So I think when the notion of intersectionality was presented by a black woman, I think that's helped many of us to recognize what sort of things we had been doing without really giving a name to them. The women's movement in this country, which is what I can talk about with some confidence and knowledge, has always been intersectional. So in our early issues, for example, we did not think that feminism was removed from or separate from the issue of poverty, or that of hunger, or that of health. And for example, when we fought against rape and when we demanded that marital rape should be recognized by the state and considered illegal in the law, we were not only addressing the issue of violence against women, but were making a critique of marriage, were making a critique of the power relations that lay within marriage, and were making a very deep critique of the family. And we're making a very deep critique of the inequality that exists in our society between genders, despite the Constitution saying. So in a sense, it's always been there, and it's something that we can now wonderfully give a name to. I think that in many ways, it's within the feminist movement that also the need for intersectionality and the recognition of it as something that empowers protest movements came in. So, for example, the labor movement in this country never recognized gender, never recognized the issue of violence against women, until women from within the labor movement said, but hey, we are being beaten up by the very same husbands who are fighting low wages and so on, and what's happening with us. Similarly, the gay movement in this country did not actually have a lot of space to ally with the women's movement because it was about gay rights. I think over a period of time that has begun to change, and we are truly heading towards an understanding that alliances across different movements are really important, and the issue of gender really is something that encapsulates caste, sexuality, race, color, and all kinds of different forms of marginalization. Having said that, I also want to say that it's not as if we in the women's movement have been completely wonderful and know everything and have done everything right. No, there have been many blind spots, and I actually don't like to use that word now, blind, because it sort of seems to give a word that is a description of a physical state. It gives it a kind of different kind of value, but nevertheless, I can't find another word to describe it. But there have been areas where the feminist movement itself, and when you talked of hierarchies, when you confront one hierarchy, sometimes you end up creating another. So addressing itself to different kinds of hierarchies created by patriarchies, the feminist movement has ended up recreating some of those very hierarchies within its structure and within its thinking. And one of those is on the question of sexuality. Another is on the question of caste, where actually the so-called mainstream movement has been deeply challenged from within. First by women, and 20 years ago we used to call them women of alternative sexualities. So even the vocabulary is now so much more aware of the power issues that lie behind it. So it's been challenged by lesbian women saying, where is the space for us in the leadership of the movement? Where is the space for our issues? How can we be open about that? Similarly, one of the biggest challenges has come from caste, from Dalit women who have said the same kind of thing, and who have also said, we think differently on different issues. And so Yashica's thinking on certain issues within the women's movement is different from mine because we come from two different places. And I, as occupying that space of relative privilege, have to think differently and have to understand where her anger and protest at me is coming from, even while I ally myself with her as a feminist. So I think those things have, to my mind, really enriched the women's movement and have created within it many very difficult and very necessary dialogues. So I think that's kind of where we are today, and I see it as an ever-evolving horizon where other challenges will come up, which is only to the good. I mean, from young people. So Yashica's identity as a Dalit, but her identity as a young woman, young feminist, battling somebody like me, who is a graying, white-haired feminist. I mean, there are differences in the way we approach issues, and there's got to be a constructive dialogue, which will not be easy, but it's necessary.
It's wonderful and inspiring. My next question is back to Yashica. You challenged the hierarchy of caste, But did that make you understand that we need to uproot caste by uprooting other hierarchies as well? Because after all, it's our bodies which reproduce race or caste. If women did not cooperate, then we could not have something called a polluting caste or a polluting race. And so how can we challenge hierarchies together? Did you think that you would need to do it together and overcome what people say identity politics into intersectional politics to take on inequality as one thing which we need to fight together?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Ruchira. Let's start with Dalit identity. I think one of the reasons it's really important, and it's been mentioned, when we give a term a name, I think we make it valid. We create a conversation that didn't exist before. So when we call ourselves Dalit, when I say I'm a Dalit person, or when Rohit said he was a Dalit person, or Chandrasekhar Azad Ravan says that, I think we are creating nuances and associations that haven't existed before. For a long time, being Dalit meant being untouchable, being lower, being inherently talentless, being inherently meritless. So when I ascribe that meaning through my body, through my presence, and then I claim that Dalit identity, I'm bringing two inherently contradicting statements together, and I'm making that statement that here is a way you can be Dalit, but you can obviously not be talentless, and if I was talentless, I wouldn't be here, hopefully. So, I challenge that notion, and by doing that, I think, coming back to your question about should we sort of do it together or maybe not have this strong identity versus have intersectional politics, I think as far as caste is concerned, and I can only speak about caste, it's until people are really, and I don't see it happening in my lifetime at all, but until people are able to get over this idea that someone is inherently lower than them, someone is inherently unequal. And I'll give you an example. I heard about this professor who's, and I don't know their name, and I'm not sure who they are, but I was told that their critique was they're a left-wing figure, and they said, everything's okay, and I understand inherently caste is bad and everyone's equal, but जब वो खाना खाते हैं तो हम उनके साथ बैठ के खाना नहीं खा सकते. What I mean is, this professor said, everything's okay, we're all equal, but when we eat together, I can't sit and eat with them. Or if I sit and eat with them and they leave their plates behind, I can't pick up their plates because it's just something inside me that creates disgust. So with examples like this, I think as long as people keep thinking the way they do, it will be important for people like me to keep asserting our Dalit identity, to keep spreading this message that there is a way to be proud, there is a way to be who you are, have the education you have, and still be Dalit. So we are refuting that. And as far as the intersectionality of resistance is concerned, I think there are ways to do that by, you mentioned earlier, by understanding each other and creating a dialogue, and by looking inwards and giving space to all kinds of voices. I think that's one way, but I'm not sure if not speaking about being Dalit, and not speaking about being queer is at all a way to go forward. But I think we need to create diverse viewpoints and diverse leaderships also in the movement. And I cannot speak for any kind of movement. I'm barely an activist, I'm a journalist. But from what my limited understanding, what that says is that there should be Dalit women being able to lead the movement and create these different intersectionalities.
Thank you. Vivek, I've already asked you your question, so...
Sorry, I kind of forgot the question.
Well, almost similar to what I asked Yashica, that, when you challenge one hierarchy and one kind of discrimination, does it make you feel empathy for other kinds of movements, and how can you connect with them? As a journalist, you might have thought about it, living in Bombay.
For the longest time, I was under the belief, and maybe it was just sort of, what is the word? It was just sort of enhanced that the gay man hates the lesbian woman. there's always this strong divide. Wherever you go, in whatever spaces, the gay man hates the lesbian woman. There is no ground for conversation, there's no dialogue, there are no spaces where you can meet, come together, speak. And for the life of me, I didn't understand what was going on. So you're already discriminated against for being who you are. And then there's another layer, where within the LGBT community, there's other kinds of discrimination. Discrimination against trans people, discrimination against bisexual. And they all come from within. And that was very difficult to, it's not about toppling, but it's just about understanding, as Urvashi also mentioned, about creating spaces for dialogue. And that happened much later. And I'm glad it happened. I'm glad, like I said, there's a time when you can sit face to face and you can talk about these things. Like, I don't care what the cis-het man has to say anymore, honestly. I have no interest in what his conversation is and what he thinks. I am more concerned with the intersections of, and I know that in the community there's so much to do. For me as a gay man, there's so much that I have to do and work on myself constantly. Because there's so much I don't understand, and there's a need to understand and talk about it. So I cannot use feminism loosely. I cannot use being lesbian loosely or being trans person loosely. I have to, be more empathetic.
Thanks.
Yes, we did come together on 377, and then that's great. But again, I always want to know what next. That is something that makes for larger conversations and change.
Absolutely. Sharmila, same question, I think, similar question, that, in America we are taking on race, but race is so interconnected to poverty, and both are so interconnected to the fact that in both our countries, I've been thinking about this, the country where I was born and the country where I live, we have been revisited by a very strong toxic masculinity, and both countries began on a different struggle. India, of course, took on British colonialism through civil disobedience, and United States took on colonialism through civil war. And in both the countries, we forged different paths. We took on a socialist path. The United States took on a capitalist path. And, we tried to tackle the inequalities left behind in different ways. And yet today, both democracies are under threat from this kind of toxic masculinity and vigilantism that we see, and populism. And what I have been grappling with is that, is it because we never took on the basic hierarchy, which I'm harping again, is the hierarchy of gender, because after all, race, caste, class, it all comes from there, and we normalize that hierarchy. And because of that, this toxic masculinity is resurfacing in our politics. And so I would like you to think about that and comment on that.
Okay, well, let me begin first with where you started with the question of race, because it's in the United States, it's a mashup category. So in the census, the current census, the 2020 census is about to come out in the United States, which might introduce some new categories of race. But currently, let's see, we have a mix of pseudo-biological, race has many definitions. One is pseudo-biological, that's the kind of so-called black-white, and we can get into what white is, and is white the same as Caucasian? Because historically, legally, it has not been so in the United States. We have geographic, that's what Asian is, right? Asia is a continent. And Latino, or Hispanic, you know, that's a linguistic category, right? It's based on the language spoken by people. So we have geography, language, pseudobiology, and 100 years ago in the United States, you could throw in theology too. So I always say if I had arrived 100 years ago in the US from when I did, Hindu would be my race. Because Hindu, much like, no, I mean, it's just like Hebrew was the race. It was a race category, and it was actually one accepted by Jews, because the idea of Judaism as a religion is using a Protestant category of religion and imposing it on a very different kind of system, right? So Jews as Hebrews as that, which is both a race and a culture. And Hindu was the same way, right? I'd be that kind of Hindu with a double O. Yeah, like not 007, but 00 Hindu. So that's what I'd be. So we have all that going on, and that's from the first census in the US, where there were 3 races really, white, black, and Indian. Not my kind of Indian, the other kind, right? And it was all going to be about free and unfree, right? That's what the US, the first census is 1790, and much of it is trying to figure out who can be property and who cannot be property. But you know, Indians from our part of the world have played a really interesting role in both the legal and cultural and political definition of race in the United States since the early 20th century. So some of the most important Supreme Court cases fought on citizenship that has been tied to race. So citizenship was also tied to race in the United States in this way. So naturalization, right? That's the process by which someone who is foreign-born becomes a citizen, was available from 1790 till the 1950s only to white people in the United States. So you could be a citizen if you were born, but if you had come from somewhere else, naturalization was closed off to you if you were not white until the 1950s. That meant from the early 20th century, there have been cases where people have been trying to assert their whiteness. So one of the most famous cases of that is the case of Bhagat Singh Thind versus United States. Thind, for those of you who don't know, was a man from the subcontinent, a Punjabi Sikh who had actually been in the British Army and then had gone to the United States, had enlisted right at the end of World War I in the US Army. He goes to court to prove he's white. Now you'd say, what a weird thing, why is this man doing this? And there are other cases, by the way, of people from the subcontinent around the time they're doing that. It's because Thind is trying to become a naturalized citizen, and naturalization is not available to him. So this is a landmark case. Anyone who studies citizenship law in the US this is the case taught in law schools, right? So, and the court goes back and forth. They say you're white, but at the end, and this is what I'll have you think about, is that the court says that Thind is Caucasian, but Caucasian is not white in the United States. So citizenship is available for whites. And so, and the ways in which they test that he's Caucasian is like old school stuff, like looking at your veins and see if you have blue veins and all of this stuff. And then I'll just say one thing, but how did we become Asian? It's only Indian immigrant groups agitated because they were declared white in the 1950s. They agitated in the 80s to become Asian under the US Census so they could avail themselves of affirmative action benefits, right? So by the time I arrived in the US, the census and the government threw up its hand and said, South Asians, define yourself. And that's where we become, I think, that's where the fact that I was trying to act white and so many Indians tried to be white adjacent, which has nothing to do with skin color, by the way, comes from the fact that these historic exigencies made us choose our own race. We still can legally choose our own race in the United States.
Fascinating. Urvashi, you mentioned that we have to build alliances between movements, and this is exactly what Gandhiji did. Mountbatten asked him when India became independent that, Mr. Gandhi, how did you create such a big movement? And he said, I did not create any movement, I joined movements. So perhaps what you're talking about is the way forward, that we understand each other's inequalities and figure out how can we join a common struggle against inequality, which the self-respect movement did, where they connected gender with caste. And Jabala did when she said, I don't know who the father of my child is, and he turned out to be Parshuram, right? So, Urvashi, my question to you is, how do we do this? From all your years of being in the movement, documenting struggles, perhaps you have some words of wisdom before we open up the floor to questions.
You know, I think we're already doing it a lot. We just need to see it. For example, when Vivek talked about the differences between the gay movement and the lesbian movement, but all of those people, including the trans movement and others, came together to fight for 377 and formed coalitions and subsequently came together to fight for the trans bill and so on. So I think there are alliances being built. If you see the women who are protesting the Citizenship Act across India now, from Shaheen Bagh in Delhi to many other places, the issue of women's right to citizenship and equal citizenship as individuals has hardly ever been recognized in this country in practice. It has been there on paper, but in practice, citizenship for us is mediated through family and marriage. And here are women standing up and saying this, and here are men supporting them. So in a sense, I think it's already happening. We need to recognize that it's happening around us. And very quickly, in our own work, because you asked about the hierarchies and understanding, I forget, yes, discrimination. So in our own work, for example, as feminist publishers, so I'm a feminist publisher and we publish books about women and by women. And when we started, it was very easy for us to believe that we are going against the grain and we are doing something alternative because A, knowledge was dominated by men, and the production of knowledge was also dominated by men. So we created content and we produced it, and it was feminist content, but it was limited because it was created from Delhi and was in English, and therefore, by and large, addressed elite middle-class women and was created by them. Then we had to think, how can we be in a country like India and recognize the many marginalizations that exist, you know, of caste, color, religion, location, etc., all of that. So we started to address those. Now, in those, then, for example, when we publish on caste and when we publish writings by Dalit women, we are often faced with this question, which many writers put to us, very legit: why should we give our voice to you and allow you to represent us? We have our own forums where we want to speak out. And this is exactly what I was saying 35 years ago to the male world of knowledge. Why should you choose to represent us? So I have to understand now that the position of power which my work now places me in always needs to be alert to the new forms of articulation that are growing and not to appropriate those. So it's an ever learning lesson. And I think that if you're aware of those kinds of differences, then the dialogues will happen, as long as you don't think you're always right.
Thank you. Wonderful. I'll take 3 questions from the floor, and please keep it short because we just have 9.5 minutes left. Can we start with the woman in blue at the back? Her hands up. On the left. On your left. There. Yeah.
Greetings here.
Yeah, go ahead and ask. Don't waste time.
How could the champions of equality and democracy pursue the annihilation project, like the brushing away this caste intersection from the whole society of the world?
Okay. Can you give the mic to them? To him.
Hello, ma'am. My question is, once a Brahmin came to my home for chanda, and when I offered him a glass of water, then he refused. So my question is, who started this discrimination between caste?
Very good. वहाँ पर एक question. उधर. That side.
Good morning. I like to ask the question, how problematic is the notion of, I mean, today you see a lot of notions of caste pride among the upper caste, especially Brahmins. There are certain Brahmin associations which tend to, like, you know, put forward the fact that, yes, we are there and there are only Brahmins for other Brahmins. Especially recently there was a Brahmin conference held, like worldwide Brahmin conference. So how problematic is the fact that such associations are forming even today and they represent some sort of a caste pride, is my question.
Yashica, would you like to go first and keep your answer to just 2 minutes so that, you know, what we can do is then maybe get more questions, yeah?
So I'll start with the question that was asked first, caste pride. So I don't think it's a new phenomena. Caste pride has existed since the caste system has, and I'll get to that as well. Brahmins have asserted caste pride. You see the Jatt behind the people's cars, or like Brahmin, or matrimonials where people are saying Brahmin girl only for Brahmin boy, or Agarwal girl only for non-feminists girl wanted in our family, you know. So you know, those associations of caste pride have always existed. Or 100% pure veg, that's a coded word for being Brahmin, because pure vegetarianism is an articulation against Dalits who eat beef, Dalits who eat meat. Not that other castes don't, but it was a direct attack on Dalits. And that's why when Dalit pride is now being asserted, it's a response to that kind of caste pride that has always been there. And I think in response to Dalit pride, Brahmin or any other upper caste, not just Brahmins, but all other upper caste people are now saying, we can also say, well, you've been saying. And it's not new, it's not different, but of course if you want to keep rubbing salt in the wound, go for it. We can also heighten our voices.
Does anyone else want to take a shot at answering this? No. Any other questions? Oh, there's lots. What about starting with that young lady there?
Hi, my name is Bagda. I'm a lawyer and a researcher. My question is to Ms. Sharmila. I find it very interesting and very new that you suggested that in the US you can choose your caste, your race. How does that happen, and what do you mean that Caucasian is not the same thing as white? Could you just explain that? It's really new to me and I just don't understand how that works.
Okay, hold on. We'll take 2 more questions. Okay, there's somebody here who's been trying for a long time and the person next to him.
Yeah, hi Yashica ma'am. Yeah, so my question is like, you have been writing in English, which is not the case with most of the Dalits even today. So when you are writing in English, which is an elite upper caste language, is it just the language, or like you are asserting and claiming your space here? Yeah, which like you're by using a language which is not supposed to be used by a Dalit.
और एक question आपके पीछे जो आदमी बैठे हैं, उधर why he's there?
I have few questions. I'll make it short.
One. Please ask one.
We are humans and we are gendering things. Barbie dolls only for girls and cars for boys only. So what are the ways to break the object stereotypes, or what are the different ways to stop gendering the objects? And one more for Vivek, sir. And like in Chhattisgarh, with advocacy, we are like we have included chapters on transgenders on the syllabus of school children. But what about your state situations on the syllabus, on the courses of schools and other things? And one more question for Yashica. I'm an aspiring journalist, but I don't want to get into politics, but in what other things I can get into other than politics? Thanks.
Okay, we'll start with Vivek first, because, and then Sharmila, and then Urvashi.
So I think, you know, about dolls for girls and whatever, cars for boys, I don't, so I just feel that, I think a lot of people today, now I really don't know about at what level in society or whatever as you would like to call them, they are breaking it. Bilkul. They are breaking it and it's getting there. That's all I can say. And you know, form of entertainment or media is also asserting that in a way. So I think that's happening. And about the syllabus, I don't know of any such change in the syllabus in Maharashtra, because I come from there. So.
So, a very quick answer. Not everybody can. It's people from South Asia or the subcontinent in the United States can self-select their race in the U.S. Census. And that's because I just gave you a very compressed version of the last 100 years of the history. But we are kind of a test case in that, and the subcontinent is second only to the continent of Africa in its genetic diversity. So that's why. So Nikki Haley, in her voter registration card, Nikki Haley, who's of South Asian descent and the United States representative to the UN, selects white as her race, and she can, according to the laws of the United States. In the 1990 census, about 25% of people of South Asian origin chose white as their race. About 5% chose black, and the rest just filled in the form using terms from indigenous terms, which just shows that a great majority of people from South Asia are actually rejecting all the kind of options that the US government is giving them and kind of filling it with their own words. So the census is, of course, it's a work in progress, right? And white and is not Caucasian, that's just actually in the verdict of Bhagat Singh Thind versus the United States, where the judge said in the end that Thind is Caucasian, but that is not white. And citizenship was at that time, naturalization was reserved for whites only. So that's in the legal papers.
Hi, so to come to your question about using English. First of all, I want to really call out the way we understand English and the meaning and the class associations that we have with English. I think we need to first start with rejecting them. But having said that, I think English has been associated as an upper caste language. It's because not just upper caste, but also upper class. A lot of us when I was a young kid, I worked really hard to sound the way I do. I didn't always do that. I worked in a call center when I was 17, and I got this training to speak like a British person, and I have this mangled accent now. But yes, the decision to write in English was absolutely a conscious one, but not now. The decision to become an English language journalist was a conscious decision. And also Rohit Vemula's last letter, which was in English, really awakened something inside me and shifted something inside me, because I hadn't read anything by the Dalit person in English before. And of course, that doesn't mean English versus Hindi binary is something we should, that's not what I'm commenting. I'm just saying it was an awakening. It was an awakening for myself. And I think more Dalits should read and write in English so we can create a global audience for our work and our content.
Thank you. We just have 3 seconds left, so no more questions. But I think I'm just so privileged to be part of this panel. Thank you all for the work you do and what you will continue to do. And perhaps gender fluidity will offer us the hope of fluidity in all other hierarchies. Thank you.
All of our panelists will be signing books in the book signing tent, which is out of our venue to the left towards Mughal tent. And can you mention that I will have my books in the tent so they don't... And I will also just announce that Ruchira Gupta will have her books in the tent with her, so you don't need to rush to the bookstore and then try and rush back. I have got another announcement about a venue change. The 2:30 p.m. Session reporting the new India, which is in your brochure.